How long is this going to take? You might be thinking that right now because we've reached the message part of the service, and you might be thinking, oh, how long is it going to take today? I know. I've myself had to sit a few times with listening to a sermon or a message where I've thought to myself, how long's this going to take? But that probably isn't what's making you anxious today. If you're anxious about how long this is going to take, it's probably about how long we're going to be stuck where we are. How long are we going to be dealing with this virus? How long are we going to be dealing with this epic crisis that is affecting everybody? So it's not just about individuals, is it? It's about everyone. For some people, you might have even gone into this thinking, well, I'm just going to stay at home, or I'm going to work at home for a while. It's all going to be fine, and then it'll be over. There's other people who, as late as yesterday, found out they don't have a job now. So they're sitting at home wondering how long this is going to take, because we're worried about how we're going to take care of ourselves. We're worried about what we're going to go to. Some of us might even be thinking, you know, things used to be actually a lot better than I thought at the time, because now they're so different and I don't know what's happening next. We're anxious about how long things are going to be like this. How long are we going to be in this wilderness of wondering? You know, when we started Lent, and I started this series, I want to do a series this year on wilderness, but look at wilderness differently, because we had different characters in the Bible, and different stories that they might tell, and how they experienced wilderness, whether it was knowingly going there or whether they found themselves there by accident, whether it was about what they learned there or how glad they were to leave it behind. Individuals. But that's not how we're experiencing this now. It's global. It is global. It's why we call it a pandemic. It's global. It's everywhere. So today, I want to talk a little bit about the experience of a people, the experience of the Hebrew people in the wilderness. So here's an interesting thing right off the top, is that I didn't have a specific moment. In fact, I don't think there's a specific moment that one needs to point at in that story that's about people learning to become a people. So we heard the Ten Commandments, and we heard the first iteration of the Ten Commandments, when Moses hears them from God for the first time, and they're pretty rigid. We call them commandments too, by the way, because the Geneva Bible in the 16th century called them commandments for the first time. Until then, they were simply called the 10 sayings. In fact, Jewish people will know them, not as the 10 commandments, but as the 10 sayings. They weren't meant to be commands, the way we understand that word. And then we sang a hymn. We sang a hymn, a bit of a hair raiser of a hymn in the old days, you know, Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah. And hopefully in that hymn you heard some of the highlights of the story, the fiery pillar, people being fed and watered in the wilderness by God, even though they thought it was Moses that was doing it, but by God, taking care of in the wilderness, coming to the promised land, even coming to the promised land, how they needed to be the generation that had faith in where they were going, because it wasn't exactly what they thought it was going to be. It hits all the highlights, but it, of course, does so in a particular way, in a particular language that's a little bit more traditional than contemporary, with a tune that is, again, a little bit more traditional than contemporary, but it helps us learn a little bit more about the story. It helps us reconnect with the story. Even, by the way, that's a classic Welsh hymn. And so if you're Welsh, you're not even just connecting with the story of the Hebrew people. It might be reminding you of your heritage too, which is kind of the point. See, we don't have time to read the whole story. I'm saying we don't have time this morning, but let's face it, we all have time. So if you feel like reading from Exodus, the beginning of Exodus, to pretty much the first chapter or two of Joshua in the Hebrew Scripture, please feel free. It's fascinating and interesting reading. It's a great story, and here's the thing about it. It's not just about the story. This is why I say we need all of it. It's not just about the story. It's about the laws. It's about the commandments, the sayings. It's about the laws and the rules and all of the structure part in there. Because, see, here's what happened. After generations of being slaves, of being oppressed and controlled by others, suddenly all of these people found themselves free. Free to leave. And they left together. Yes, they were chased, and we know the story of crossing the Red Sea and how the waters came back in on the Pharaoh's army. But even from that first moment, there were people who wanted to go back. They wanted to go back to how things were, because they knew that, even if it was bad, they knew, and they felt some security in that, however it was. And they weren't just people who were being used to build things. Some of those people who were slaves in Egypt, some of those people would have been farmers. Some of those people would have been builders. Some of those people would have been laborers. Some of them might even have been teachers in the sense that, they needed to learn how to do stuff. Some of them might have even been ministers and pastors. They would have been the tasks that they were, even under that oppressive way of living. And now, suddenly, they find themselves out in the desert. They're being chased by the Pharaoh. Wouldn't it have been better to stay there? It would have been safer, too. But God provides. Well, then they're hungry. At least they had food in Egypt. If only we could get back to where we were. We had food. We had all the necessities. Where's the toilet paper? And God provides manna from heaven. Something that looks like a white flaky substance, but you can eat it. It doesn't look particularly appetizing. It's not a great grand feast or anything, but it is what's needed. It is enough. But then we're thirsty. We need to have water. And water is provided. But then we need more. We need more than the essentials of life in terms of our physical body. Those things were provided. Not in abundance, of course. Not everything we wanted, but enough. All that was needed. But even then, that's still not enough. We're out here in the desert, Moses. Now what? We have no home. How do we get to this promised land? How do we get to this home? And better still, when are we going to get there? Because this could be over, please. That's Moses in the desert with a car full of little kids going, are we there yet? Except he's not just driving a few hours, he's driving years. Why did they have to take the long and winding road and not just go there directly? Why didn't they just get where they needed to go? This is why the story of the 10 sayings that are the foundation, And all of those other laws and rules, those dietary rules even, all of that stuff were needed in that day. All of those things that are in Leviticus in that day were needed. Because here were a bunch of individuals in the desert. See, this is the moment at which it doesn't matter whether you think that this is historical or not. It doesn't matter whether there's any archaeological evidence to back up any of the story of the Hebrews in the wilderness and coming into the promised land. It doesn't, because that's not the point of the story. The point of the story isn't about people wandering around the wilderness and finally getting to where they need to be. It's about them becoming. Literally, becoming. It's about a bunch of individuals learning how to be a community together. It's about them understanding that while we call those things 10 Commandments and use that word that sounds like it's an order and or else, they would have heard that as 10 sayings that help us live together. When they heard the many more laws and rules and things, I don't think they heard them as, you will behave this way or else there is a punishment. I think they heard, you will understand these as a means by which we become a community, a nation of people. That we understand our relationship with God better. That we understand our relationship with each other better. That we create community. And we do it not just between people, but between people and the land, between the people and God. That's the point of all that stuff, all that structure. It's not to have structure so that we can have structure. It's so that we can have a better understanding of how to relate to each other. I love the image, by the way. One of the things I love most about the story of them in the wilderness is that when they traveled in the wilderness, wherever they built the temple, it was a tent. It could be moved. And even the fact that you could move the whole thing aside, even when it was standing, it still moved. Right? The fabric of the tent moves in the wind. It's alive. Then eventually they build this great solid rock thing in Jerusalem, of course, and that's where it is. It's solid as a rock. That's where God lives. God doesn't go anywhere else, I guess. God just lives there, except God is everywhere. And so when the temple is destroyed, they once again find themselves remembering that God is everywhere. But in the desert, with the tent, it moves. God travels with them. Whether that's historical fact or not, think about that metaphor for a second. Think about how wherever they go, wherever they pitch their tent, God pitches God's tent as well. Instead of laws that bind us within a structure, what if we understood the commandments, I hate that word. What if we understood that less as you shall do it or shall not do it or else, and more as imagine how we relate to each other better if we understood that instead of thou shalt not kill, thou shalt give life. Thou shalt remember that all life is precious. Imagine relationships. Honor your mother and father. Imagine what that means to relationships. It's not an or else. It's about building relationships. Not coveting your neighbor's anything. again, in the story that we just heard, where we hear those 10 sayings, it's the language of the era. Put that into today. Put all of those things in today. Put all of those experiences even where they are fed and watered in the wilderness, not with anything they could possibly ever desire, but what we need. Simple, straightforward. What do you need? And at the end of the story, of course, they come to the promised land. But the land's different. They expected a land literally flowing with milk and honey, and for them to simply take possession of. And it turns out, first of all, it's not flowing with milk and honey. And secondly, it's already occupied. So figure that out. But God asked them to have faith. And so a new generation, a faithful generation. So we need not only for our bodies to be fed, we need not only for our minds to be fed and our hands literally to be fed in terms of how we might connect and help each other, how we might be a community. We need faith. We need hope. We need these things because the wilderness will end. We don't live in the wilderness forever. We never do. When you're in it, it's a little bit like a Sunday morning sermon sometimes. You think to yourself, is this ever going to end? But yes, it is. Yes, it is. Will things ever go back to normal? Well, no, actually, no. And that's a good thing. Because the experience has changed us, transformed us. We come out of the wilderness different than when we went in. We can make that different better. We can. By understanding that while we're in the wilderness, we still need community. And here's where we're at right now, aren't we? We're trying to figure out ways to create community in an environment where we can't engage each other personally. We can't touch. There's no hugging. There's no getting together to play a game. There's no gathering in churches. There's no gathering to watch a game. There's no gathering at restaurants now. There's no gathering at school. So how are we going to do that? Are we going to just say, yeah, you can't, or are we going to find new ways? So that when we come back to being able to do that, again, to be able to gather together, not only have we discovered new things, but we've also realized the most important thing, which is love and compassion and grace are still there. They always have been. How we share them and connect with each other changes. But love is still there. It is the thread, the thing that connects us all. It's still there. We will find ways to share that. We will find ways to be community. The common unity. We will find ways to be one wherever we are, however we find ourselves. Because deep within us, we know we are one. Whether we can touch or engage in all of those things that we always used to, that will come back one day, we are still one.